Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Art of English here at Advanced Studio Classroom. I'm Peter.
And I'm Linda. And today we are talking about The Wind in the Willows by Kenneth Grahame. It is a lovely story. It first started as animal stories that the author told to his young son, and it became a book. And actually, a little bit of background on Kenneth Grahame. He was a banker most of his adult life or his working life, and when he retired from that job, that's when he started writing full-time. He was able to pursue his passion. While he was a banker, he did publish some things, but he wasn't able to really realize his passion until after. And he published this book, The Wind in the Willows, in 1908.
Right. So it is written in that time, in England of that time, that is known as Edwardian England, named after the King of England at the time, Edward VII, I believe. And it's generally considered to refer to a period from the beginning of the century, from about 1900 to about the beginning of the First World War in 1914. And it was a pleasant time in England. It was a time of economic prosperity, and there was a time of peace, exactly, time of political peace, even though, it's just about 14 or 20 years, depending on how you cut it. But that is part of, I think, the charm that Graham's book picks up on, is that it was a time when there was time to enjoy things, at least, if you had a certain amount of money, if you were of a certain social class, you had time for these sort of things. And in a way, it is geared for children. It's written for children, so it kind of has a fantasy element to it. But what's striking is how the fantasy element is so grounded in reality.
Yes.
It's not a fantasy of monsters or planets or things we normally think of as fantasy. It's a fantasy of simply enjoying the pleasures of living by the Thames River in the English countryside.
Yeah, and the countryside, the location, the setting, plays a big role in this book. It's a character in itself. We meet the characters, the animals that are in the story, but the countryside is also featured, and it is a character within the story.
Yes. So why don't we go ahead then and read our excerpt for you, and then we'll talk a bit about it, talk about some of the vocabulary in it. This is, if you have your September your September Advanced magazines, you want to open up to the Art of English feature right there in the beginning of the magazine. And you can read along with us as we read this excerpt from Kenneth Grahame's The Wind in the Willows. He thought his happiness was complete when, as he meandered aimlessly along, suddenly he stood by the edge of a full-fed river. Never in his life had he seen a river before. This sleek, sinuous, full-bodied animal, chasing and chuckling, gripping things with a gurgle and leaving them with a laugh, to fling itself on fresh playmates that shook themselves free and were caught and held again. All was a shake and a shiver, glints and gleams and sparkles, rustle and swirl, chatter and bubble. The mole was bewitched, entranced, fascinated. By the side of the river he trotted as one trots when very small by the side of a man who holds one spellbound by exciting stories. And when tired at last, he sat on the bank, while the river still chattered on to him, a babbling procession of the best stories in the world, sent from the heart of the earth to be told at last to the insatiable sea.
As he sat on the grass and looked across the river, a dark hole in the bank opposite, just above the water's edge, caught his eye, and dreamily he fell to considering what a nice, snug dwelling place it would make for an animal with few wants and fond of a bijou riverside residence, above flood level and remote from noise and dust. As he gazed, Something bright and small seemed to twinkle down in the heart of it, vanished, then twinkled once more, like a tiny star.
Okay, and that is the excerpt. So let's...
And this is right at the beginning. This is from chapter 1.
Yes, good point.
So we are introduced to Mole. This is the first character that we see in the book. And yeah, he is on an adventure. And that's what the story is mainly about, the series of stories which makes up the whole book. These animals go on adventures, and we get to follow along on their adventures.
Right. But again, they are sort of what we might think of as tame adventures. It's not adventures like in The Lord of the Rings, where they have to fight a great battle of some sort or scale these huge mountains. The adventures are adventures...
people would go on.
Yeah, exactly.
It's
Adventures
not
people would
fantasy,
go on.
like you mentioned before.
Right,
They're not fantastical.
Right. It's the adventure of going to a new neighborhood that you've never been to before. It's the adventure of meeting a new person and who's not quite like you, but there's something interesting about them.
Right, or just exploring a place like in the woods where you haven't been before.
Right, right. So there's an interesting blend, really, of fantasy, talking animals, with reality in this book that I think is what gives it its appeal both to children and to adults since it was published in 1908, well over 100 years.
Yeah, and I never heard or never was read this book as a child, but it's really endearing. I can see how it's a beloved children's classic.
Yes, yes. I, too, read it for the first time for our Art of English feature, and it was just delightful. It is, because you might think, sort of as I did, a children's novel, this is going to be great for children, but not really for me. But no, it's wonderful because, yes, you can see how children would like it, but you just in the writing, which is one of the reasons we wanted it for the Art of English, is because the use of English is so well done.
Yes, very descriptive.
Descriptive.
Really draws you in.
Exactly. There's a word for English like this, lyrical. If something like the lyrics in a song, but lyrical, it's sort of like prose which is written in like it's poetry, which has almost a richness of poetry in it, but it's not poetry. It's prose is, just straightforward line by line by line, as opposed to poetry, which can be a little more experimental and different and such. But lyrical prose, which is what The Wind in the Willows has, is prose that reads like poetry.
And makes it so much more engaging.
Right.
And that actually brings us to our first question.
Yes. Number 1, find the pairs of alliteration. Words with repeated initial sounds, such as windy weather. Find the alliteration, the pairs of alliteration in the excerpt. What is the effect of such writing? Well, let's find the pairs first. What pairs of alliteration do we find here?
So the one that jumps out to me first is full-fed river.
Yes.
And you see the F in full and fed. That makes it a pair of alliteration. So it also uses this literary element of alliteration, but it also uses another element, which we'll get into.
Right.
So this river... It's given life, and it's fully fed. And you usually don't think of rivers as needing to be fed or needing food. We can think of it as being fed in terms of the water comes from a source. So that source, or whether it's rain or another body of water, is feeding the river. So it's full. And we have this full river that's going along, and there are many different adjectives that Grahame uses to continue to describe the river.
And they continue to, the adjectives are very often alliterative. They are more examples of alliteration. The river is chasing and chuckling. Chasing and... See, alliteration doesn't have to be the words right next to each other. They can be smaller words in between them, like and or of or on. But the main words will have the same initial sound, like chasing and chuckling, gripping things with a gurgle, and leaving them with a laugh.
Yeah, as well as to fling itself on fresh playmates.
Fling, fresh, yes.
And just before that, there was 2 back-to-back, sleek, sinuous. Those are
yes,
both
right up
with
front.
S.
Sleek, sinuous, full-bodied. Not only full-fed, this river, but it was like a full-bodied animal. And then you can see... back to where we were just a moment ago, a little further down, all was a shake and a shiver. A shake and a shiver. That's sort of an archaic way of saying, that things were shaking, things were shivering. There was movement, there was energy, there was life in this river. A shake and a shiver. I think the only sort of word that we have like that nowadays, which itself is kind of old, is when we say something is afoot. Like, the game is afoot, a phrase made popular by the great detective Sherlock Holmes, who was also a character created in this Edwardian English time period, the first decade or so of the 20th century. And he would always say when a mystery was just beginning, he would say, the game is afoot.
It's happening.
It's starting. It's off.
And we also have glint and gleams,
right, yes.
Another pair.
And at the very end of the paragraph, you have to listen a little bit for this, but that line about the river telling stories sent from the heart of the earth to be told at last to the insatiable sea, which is where all rivers eventually empty out into, is the ocean, the sea, the insatiable sea. And a good vocab word there, insatiable, meaning too large to be satisfied. And if
always wanting. Yeah.
If anything is too large to be satisfied, it's the ocean. So that's a good descriptive there.
Yeah, so he uses this paragraph to describe the river and how entranced, how bewitched and fascinated Mole was with it, because it was Mole's first time above ground. Moles, they are creatures who live underground. And so this was his discovery. And Grahame just uses such colorful language to describe his experience.
Right. He recreates that sense of discovery, of the magic of a river, something that, as we get on in life, we tend to take a little bit for granted, even living here in the city. And, it's wonderful to see an author use language in this way to help us see something through fresh eyes, to see it anew, like Mole is seeing it here. And the author gives us that experience that Mole is having, even though we've already had it. But it's like an almost magic, with the right word choice and the use of alliteration and such, he can put us in Mole's position and see what Mole sees and feel what Mole feels.
Yes, and the way he describes it is in a very magical way. It's like a magical feeling.
Yes.
And so there's another literary element that Grahame uses, and this brings us to question 2. How does Grahame give human qualities to the animals and elements of nature?
Right. And just because this is advanced, we're going to give you this big, long word, which means giving human qualities to animals, because you'll want to know it eventually. Anthropomorphism. Anthropomorphism. Anthro meaning human, or dealing with man. And
Anthropology.
Anthropology, exactly. And morph meaning to change or to take the shape of in some way. So anthropomorph means to, literally to take the shape of a human. And so it's applied to things that aren't human, like animals. But that's what it means. It means to give human qualities to something that is not human.
And he does this with all of the characters in the book, all of the animals. In our intro, we had some adjectives to describe the different characters. We have a loyal mole, brave rat, wise badger, and the troublemaking toad. And those are very apt adjectives or descriptions of the characters. And you see, as you read the book, you see how these adjectives apply to the animals and their adventures and how they think. And that's part of the anthropomorphism. These animals have feelings and they think like humans. They also have desires like humans.
Right. I mean, in real life, animals are thinking about food and protection, and, that's pretty much it. But here, right in our excerpt, you can see it. Here, the mole discovers the river, and then in the second paragraph there, he fell to considering, he's now just tired, resting a bit and looking at the river, and he's considering what a nice, snug dwelling place it would make for an animal with few wants and fond of a bijou riverside residence above flood level and remote from noise and dust. And, he's suddenly this mole, this animal creature, is thinking like, a middle-class banker or something, and thinking about real estate and thinking appreciatively, positively about real estate, but with a level of sophistication that, as far as we know, animals don't really have.
Right. And they all have these very comfortable homes. I think like mole's desire is to have a very comfortable home. And the homes in the book are described, and they're very much like human homes. They have furniture, they have human food.
They have tables, they have fireplaces, they have china plates. They have the things that you would find in a middle class or upper middle class home, certainly in Edwardian England and often nowadays as well. But the animals, mole and rat and badger and toad, they wear human clothes.
Yes, yeah.
So this is, to give you an idea. What's interesting, though, just briefly, is that Grahame is very fond of anthropomorphism, of giving human qualities to animals. He does it even in the book with things that are not animals. For example, in the excerpt, he does it with the river. He describes the river, like Linda said, as full-fed, having almost in the sense that it has an appetite, and that the river is chuckling, which means to laugh gently, or that the river is telling mole stories, all these stories. We're talking about just a body of water. It has no personality. It's even less personal than an animal. But part of Grahame's magic as a writer with Wind in the Willows is to give human qualities even to these elements of nature. You'll see that throughout the book, too, not just in our excerpt. There's a chapter in which Linda was saying about homes and how homes are important. And there's this one character in a chapter later in the book who's been away from his home for a while, and then he comes back to the home, and Grahame describes it almost like the home is a person who has missed him and who has been calling back to him, and whom the character feels this attachment to in a way that we don't always think about.
Right. It has a very strong effect on him.
Right. And again, creating an almost human quality to these impersonal aspects of life, a home or a river or a forest.
And the other thing that's very human about these animals is that they pay attention to manners.
Yes.
There's certain etiquette that they follow, just like humans. And they also have hobbies. They, some of the things that they like to do, like Toad likes to collect cars, or he buys them and then he does something with them that causes him to have to buy another one. But they also have feelings like humans. They feel jealousy.
They
feel embarrassment.
Longing.
Fear.
Yeah, they feel the wonder and they feel joy even. So it's not that the author is just making them human so that he can have animals talk. He really is getting at certain human qualities that we all have in our hearts and our minds, and expressing and exploring them through the adventures of these animals. I think in a way that reflects how this works as a children's novel, because children are always naturally fascinated by animals, especially animals that can talk. It's a long-standing literary device to make literature appealing for children, is to have it come, have animals who are actual characters.
Come to life. And they retain some of their animal characteristics, or at least what we think those animals are like, the reputation that they have. For example, the badger. The badger is fearless. He's very brave and fierce. And those are qualities that a badger in real life has.
Right, right. And he also notes, it's subtle, but if you read it, in the wintertime, the animals seem to sleep a lot more than they do in the spring and the summertime. The way animals do in real life. They often hibernate. Right. And in Graham's animals here, they'll still have a meal and everything, and they'll still do the washing or go for a ride in a boat or something, but they'll take these long and longer naps after the meals that they eat, which is just sort of a subtle way of acknowledging that, they are still animals. And Grahame is not just totally pretending that these are completely human beings, and that's part of the fun.
Right. And they still have habitats or homes that are similar to a home that they would have in real life, like moles. He lived underground, just like a real mole would. A water rat, he would be by the riverside in a dwelling off the riverbank.
Right. And we're just about done for this month, I'm afraid. But speaking of homes and living in homes, let's briefly touch on question 3 of you. We're going to build a snug dwelling place. Snug, there's a word we didn't actually teach in the excerpt, but it means warm, comfortable,
and
protective.
Small.
Yeah, often very small too. Snug. If you were going to build a snug dwelling place remote from noise, where would it be? Linda, where would you build a snug dwelling place?
I think mine would be in the mountain, or like in the mountainside. So it'd be snug and not too big, but very comfortable and warm.
I think that's what I would say too. I had a grandmother who lived in the northeastern United States, where I'm from originally, and she lived out in the country, and she lived near in a sort of mountain area, not big tall mountains, but mountains kind of like what we have here in Taipei. And I lived at the time in a place that did not have mountains. I lived out on the end of Long Island, just east of New York City, and like we were talking about last month in The Great Gatsby. And it's mostly beaches and flatland, so it was always kind of exciting for me to go visit my grandmother in the Northeast, to be in that mountain landscape that she lived in. And she had this little shack in the side of a hill, which was for making or storing maple sugar, because there were a lot of maple trees in this part of the country. And this was a little shack where the workers would store the syrup that they tapped from the trees. And it was surrounded by trees on all sides. It was in the middle of a forest. And just this, this quaint little house. It wasn't very, it was just a shack for workmen to use. It wasn't really a place that you would want to live. But I always enjoyed hanging out in there and just playing make-believe whenever we would visit my grandmother. And I just, thought that would make a nice little home. If you just got a space heater in there of some sort, and maybe some basic plumbing, and added an extra room for a kitchen or something, just living on the side of a small mountain, in the middle of the forest, quite away from the noise, quite remote from the noise and dust, just as Mole is thinking about here.
So let us know where your ideal snug dwelling place would be in the comments. But thank you for being with us today. We hope that you will pick up The Wind in the Willows, give it a read, or read it to a young child as a bedtime story. It's a wonderful piece of literature.
Yes, you'll enjoy it. The child will enjoy it. You'll probably enjoy it too. And we encourage you to join us again next month, when we will have another excerpt from a classic of English literature to read through with you and talk about the English in it. But for this month, I'm Peter.
I'm Linda.
Saying bye-bye.
Bye-bye.